what's involved with, what you need to think about when you're talking about migrating over to cloud in general, but also specifically to, of course, Microsoft Azure. So, again, as we're going through today, just a couple basic ground rules, if you want to call them that. Feel free to ask questions at any point. You don't need to wait until the end. Obviously, we'll leave a little space at the end for questions if you have them. But other than that, feel free to ask as we're going along. And again, if there's anything I cover you want me to go deeper into or you want me to reference a little bit more, please just let me know. So kind of starting out, I want to lay out kind of what we're going to go through today. Basically, I want to lay a little bit of groundwork in terms of why you'd even want to migrate to the cloud in general, and then of course why Azure specifically, and then kind of what's the process look like? What should you be worried about? What are the things you need to pay attention to when you're starting to make this journey? Some of you may already be doing things in Azure. Others of you, may be thinking about it. Based on industry trends, most of you will be thinking about it in the very near future if you're not already doing it today. So, again, we're going to kind of walk through the thought process that needs to take place in order to make this move, and then of course finishing up in terms of what are your next steps. How can you make this move and start transitioning over to an infrastructure as a service or cloud or Azure. I may use those terms kind of interchangeably today, but how do you make that transition, and what's the logical path for you to move in that direction? So first off, when we talk about Microsoft Azure and the cloud in general, this is the time. If you pay attention to any industry reports in terms of the IT industry, of course, cloud and infrastructure as a service is top. It's from a growth perspective, it's exponential growth at this point. Specifically around Azure, Azure grew year over year about 76%, and that's just a general number. If we look at specific services within Azure, some of them are having triple-digit growth year over year in terms of specific services. So, it really doesn't matter what industry you're in. With the way that the business is going these days, every business is in the tech business. Whether you are, manufacturing or retail or medical or legal or, healthcare, whatever the case may be, you have to have a technical aspect of your business at this point. And so now's the time to start looking at, what are some of my options? What possibilities are out there that maybe I'm not taking advantage of? And so you need to, pay attention to that and kind of understand how you can solve business problems by moving in this direction. And that's the other key thing I want to make sure that you're aware of. When we talk about moving towards Azure and moving towards cloud in general, it's not as much of a technology discussion. Obviously, the technology is pretty cool, and there's a lot of stuff that's available to you, and a lot of services that you may not have been able to do in an on-prem environment. But at the same time, underneath everything, it's a business decision. You need to realize how this is going to affect your business. There may be some things in the way that maybe it's your back end, maybe it's your accounting, things like that, the back end office, that they may need to make some, adapt some things and change some things around to make sure that you can take advantage of this. But the fact of the matter is that it is, the perfect time. A lot of people I talk to that say, oh, well, it's already moved so far along, I don't know if I can catch up with all that. Yes, you can. It's very easy from an entry point perspective. As we're going through this, and I'll talk about some of the things that you should be paying attention to, or that may be causing you to make this shift. But just keep in mind as we're going through that, you don't have to do this as an all or nothing situation either. It's about just transitioning and figuring out what makes sense for me to move, what makes sense for me to possibly keep on-prem at this point in time, and let's figure it out. Let's see what's going to be best for the business, because that's really what it comes down to. Technology aside, again, the technology is great. The technology opens up a lot of doors for you, but at the same time, it's all about the business. So let's take a look at kind of what would cause you to start looking at migrating over to infrastructure as a service, migrating over to Azure. Start looking at Azure for why, where you want to possibly move some of your workloads or some of your services. You can see the list here. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can kind of take a quick look. I do want to mention a few of them, which is specifically around, your hardware, or where maybe you're in a co-location or someone else is hosting your hardware for you. Or maybe you have your own data center, but your hardware is coming due for a refresh. In terms of that you're going to have to come up with a good chunk of money to be able to replace that existing hardware. That's a prime time to start looking at moving towards infrastructure as a service, figuring out, is that going to be a big point for us where let's start looking at the numbers on it. Let's look at the dollars and cents and figure out, okay, we're going to have to spend this much next year for new hardware just because the other stuff is not fitting the bill anymore. What other options are there? Do we have it in the budget in terms of being able to make that transition? Do we want to buy new hardware? Do we have that in the budget, or is it possible for us to possibly start shifting some of these workloads over to Azure? The other piece that I want to pay particular attention to, and it comes into play, it's in the news right now, is around security and around compliance and making sure that you're fitting in to any compliance mandates. No matter what industry you're in, you've got some legal frameworks that you have to abide by. And then, of course, just making sure that your data is secure to begin with. You hear in the news, even this past week, about another major corporation misconfigured and had their data out there, for someone to be able to get into, not necessarily easily, but at the same time, you need to make sure that you're taking care of that. With an on-prem environment, yeah, you can, you're probably familiar with that and you may feel more secure in that capacity. But when we talk about moving over to something like Azure, it opens up a lot of new possibilities for you to add additional security precautions and additional levels of security to make sure that your data stays where you want it to stay and is only accessed by the people that you want to be able to access it. So again, there's many different reasons why you may want to start looking at Azure, but those tend to be the top ones that I see when I'm talking to customers, when I'm talking to partners. So why would I want to move towards cloud? Why would I want to move towards infrastructure as a service? First off is just being able to have access from anywhere pretty much, and also be able to integrate with the existing software and applications and workloads that you're currently running. We're not necessarily, the world of kind of sitting in one place and only having all of your applications on-prem is going away. Software as a service is taking over, whether it be things like Office 365, whether it be maybe you're using, collaboration tools, or maybe you're using cloud storage or something along those lines. All of those pieces, nothing's sitting in a vacuum. All of those pieces have to integrate, all those pieces have to work together, and you also need to make sure that your users can access them easily and make sure that they're productive and that they can be as efficient as possible. So the cloud and moving towards infrastructure as a service really opens that up. The other big thing when we're talking about moving towards infrastructure as a service, moving towards Azure, is the fact that this is now a utility style billing model, meaning if I'm using Azure, I pay for only what I use. I don't have to worry about coming up with a whole bunch of money up front and buying hardware and then growing into it. Because the fact is, when I'm buying hardware for my on-prem environment, I'm not buying it for today. I'm buying it for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road, and then 3, 4, 5 years down the road, I have to go through that same process all over again to be able to take advantage of the newest technology. I need to make sure that I'm not letting that sit by the wayside. So when we're talking about that, when we talk about moving towards Azure, now it's a matter of we're only paying for what we use. I can spin up the resources that I need and provision the resources that I need today, and then if I need additional resources tomorrow, great, I can expand the resources that I'm using. Or if my needs go down, maybe I'm working in an environment or an industry where I've got fluctuations in my workloads. Well, if that's the case, I can easily scale up or I can scale down and again, pay only for what I need as opposed to having that big upfront cost. Then, of course, I just mentioned a moment ago in terms of security, making sure that your data is up to date, making sure that you have access to the newest security tools, to the all of the resources that you need to keep your data secure. And when I talk about security, I'm not just talking about access of the data. I'm talking about backups. I'm talking about disaster recovery. What happens if something happens to your on-prem data center? What are your options there? Obviously, moving towards an infrastructure as a service offering is going to open up some new possibilities and new options for you. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, it's about being, it's about the business. It's not about the technology necessarily. So you don't have to, when we make this shift, we're no longer worried about the depreciating, technology that we have, the data center that we have, and do we have enough resources to cover our needs? If we don't, how are we going to get those? That's not an issue anymore. Now we can invest in the business and not necessarily just the technology. So what are the kind of I'll call them here we call them the key scenarios, but really what are the doorways that the gateways that you get into infrastructure as a service? First off, it's taking an existing workload, taking a server, whether it be a database server, a file server, whatever the case may be, and moving that into Azure. If that's the case, then you can easily take advantage of that. You can move your workloads, but again, it's not an all or nothing situation. If I decide that I want to move one workload, maybe I want to move a database, but I don't want to move my file server, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to do this all at once. It's about picking and choosing and figuring out what's going to be best for your business. But again, the key thing is you can easily shift the existing workload that you have on-prem. Maybe you're running it on a VMware environment or a Hyper-V environment, and it's time for that host hardware to be replaced. Well, let's take a look. Let's see. Maybe we can just actually migrate that pretty easily and seamlessly right up into Azure and allow our users to continue to use it, but now I no longer have to worry about the existing hardware. Or there's new services that are available to you. So Azure Files is a prime example of this, where if you're running a file server on-prem right now, there's a service in Azure called Azure Files, which is basically a managed file server. You don't actually have to run the server at all. They just give you the storage that you need. You connect back to your on-prem environment. Your users still access it like it's a local drive, but meanwhile, it's actually residing in Azure. So you can take advantage of not only the redundancy that Azure offers, but also backup capabilities and DR capabilities, and also having one central repository. Maybe you've got multiple locations that you currently have multiple data centers or multiple servers that are accessing those. Well, now we can have it all in one place and we can scale to whatever level we need and then take advantage of that. And again, it's all residing in Azure, so I can take advantage of the efficiencies that Azure brings me. And then of course, and this might even be the number one first kind of gateway into Azure, is the protecting your data, backups, DR, business continuity, making sure that you have whether a copy of your data or possibly multiple copies of your data, or maybe it's a situation where you need to be able to have a failover location. Maybe you're running a second data center right now and does it make sense for you to run an entire second data center? Maybe, or there might be options for you to actually move that second data center right up into Azure and allow them to worry about the underlying hardware, and you can just worry about making sure that your data is there when you need it. So when we talk about Azure, there's just a few, and again, I'm not going to go too deep into a lot of this because it's kind of general, themes, if you will. But I just wanted you to keep in mind that specifically, I mean, you can see the productive, hybrid, intelligent, and trusted. Those are marketing terms. They sound very good, but the one I want you to really pay particular attention to is the hybrid model. So when we talk about hybrid basically means I'm running some stuff on-prem, I'm running some stuff in the cloud, and letting them work together. And ideally, they're working seamlessly. Azure, if you're talking about the overall industry and it's the other vendors that are in this space, Azure is the only one in the industry that was designed as a hybrid model from day one. It's a Microsoft product. It's based off of Hyper-V. When we talk about Azure, it's running Hyper-V in the background. So they're doing all of that for you. So it's not, they designed it to say, okay, you're going to run some stuff on-prem, you're going to run some stuff in the cloud. That's fine. Run it wherever you'd like. We can fit into whatever roadmap and whatever framework you'd like to use. So again, keep that in mind. The Azure hybrid model is what they were designed to do, because the other thing you keep in mind is that Microsoft's been around for decades at this point. They have a lot of other products besides Azure. They've got operating systems, they've got applications, they've got databases, they've got development software. All of those pieces all need to fit together. And so some of the other vendors that are in this infrastructure as a service space, they're not as tightly integrated in this capacity because, again, Microsoft is making sure they're not just starting with something brand new, they're also making sure that the existing customer base, you guys have all been doing this for years, making sure that you have a bridge to make this journey into Azure, and making sure that you can also continue to run your on-prem stuff without necessarily affecting your users and affecting the way that you do business. But at the same time, giving you new options and new possibilities. If you are a developer, you probably are doing things Visual Studio and other third party, or maybe you're starting to get in containers and Kubernetes and things along those lines. The fact of the matter is all of those pieces will work. You can continue to do that. In a lot of cases, you can actually expand what you're doing. So right now, you may be doing development. Maybe you've got some test environments, some QA environments, some development environments. Well, you can, why not move those into an environment where you can have unlimited resources if you need them, but also be able to scale down if you need to and really take advantage, whether you want to have a test environment. Maybe you're developing an application and you realize, okay, we want to give our users a chance to kind of kick the tires on this application, give us feedback, let's find out what's working, what's not, let's continue to expand this application. If you're talking about an on-prem, you can do that, of course, but you need to make sure that you have the hardware on hand to be able to handle that. When we're talking about Azure now, I can do my dev environment, my test environment in Azure. I can shut it down if I want to and stop paying for it for the period that I'm not using, because again, I'm only paying for what I actually use. So I can use it when I need it and I can shut it down when I don't need it. But in the meantime, I can use that test environment and say, okay, we're going to try it out. And then maybe we shift that workload back on-prem once we've done our testing and once we've done a proof of concept. Great, you can continue to do that. But now again, you've got new options and new possibilities to help you out. As I mentioned before, that hybrid model is really the default model. It's very rare that I come across somebody who's going all in to cloud, where they're moving everything as is, let's shift everything up to cloud. It's just not happening because in a lot of cases, your business can't, you're just not ready to do that large of a move. And it just doesn't make sense for your user base, for your customer base, whatever model you might have, whatever industry you might be in, it might not be a good fit. But at the same time, because Azure was designed from a hybrid perspective, you've got options in terms of being able to have single sign-on capabilities. Maybe you're using some third-party products, whether they are, I'll just name, let's just say the Dropbox, or maybe you're using Workday or Salesforce or whatever the case may be. All of those cloud or software as a service based applications, they, in a lot of cases, you don't want to have multiple logins. So having a single sign-on capability makes that very easy, where I can actually integrate those third-party products with my Azure environment, with my on-prem environment, and I can have one single sign-on, one single password to allow my users access to all the resources they need. And also from a security perspective, that also makes your life much easier, because if somebody were to leave the company or somebody's credentials were exposed, and for whatever reason, it's very, very easy for you to have one place to make those changes or turn that account off, or whatever the case may be. So, there's a lot of different options. The other thing that you want to make sure is, when we're talking about moving or living in a hybrid world, is, can I have control over the data in the cloud just like I do on-prem? And the answer, of course, is yes. I mean, many of your security tools and the management tools that you're currently using will bridge over between an on-prem environment and a cloud environment. So you can continue to use those tools. Not to mention, moving in this direction will open up possibilities for new tools and new management and new monitoring capabilities that you might not have had with your existing on-prem environment, either because you didn't have the capacity to handle it, or maybe it was just a matter of, you just didn't have the manpower to be able to manage multiple locations, multiple regions, et cetera. So, again, it's opening up new possibilities and new options for you. If you're talking about where things are going and kind of you hear a lot of these buzzwords, whether it's artificial intelligence and machine learning, things along those lines, a lot of companies are starting to do things like chatbots and all that, these kind of next level IT. Of course, Azure is going to give you capabilities in that capacity as well. So, whether you can see the list here, but this is something that's kind of that phase 2. So the first phase is going to be, let's see what workloads we can possibly move up to the cloud. Let's take advantage of that. But phase 2 is going to be, how can we possibly take advantage of these new services that weren't available to us on-prem. Maybe it's a situation where, okay, we had a database server before. Do we want to continue to run an entire database server and manage and maintain it? Or is it possible that maybe we could run over and move it over to do a database as a service, where I don't even run a server anymore. I just say, hey, I want a database. And then I have access to the database with the same management tools, the same connections that I had before. But meanwhile, I don't have to worry about the server hardware that's running underneath it. Now I'm just running a database. I can get backups, I can get replication, I can get multiple copies of that database, again, with almost a click of a button in a lot of cases. So just keep that in mind. And then, of course, from a security perspective, I've talked about just the overall your on-prem security, but also if you're under any sort of a compliance mandate, if you have to meet any sort of a certification of proving yourself, whether, depending on whether you're a healthcare provider, or you're legal, or maybe you're in the government space, maybe you're in the, education space, things along those lines, you're held by certain mandates. The fact of the matter is, Azure will fit into just about any compliance mandate you can think of. I mean, this is just a small selection, this list that you see here. But you're probably seeing some of the big ones that your industry and your company may be held to. So, again, keep in mind, moving it into Azure doesn't make it compliant, but Azure will fit into a compliance framework, just like you will with an on-prem. But in a lot of cases, it'll actually make it easier for you to fit into that framework than it would be on-prem. So when we talk about moving to the cloud, what does that look like? What are we, what's the path that we're going to follow to get there? First off, we just need to take a look at our business. We need to figure out, well, let's see, are there workloads that we know we can possibly move up? Maybe it's a situation where you have a legacy application that isn't really accessed very often. And so would that make sense for you does it make sense for you to keep it on premises, or does it make sense for you to possibly shift that up into Azure? Those are the type of things. And also just looking at your overall business in general and deciding, hey, do I have, is our business ready for this? Do I have to make any changes? I'm used to paying upfront for all of my hardware, and we budget that way. Well, what if we're going to Azure? In a lot of cases, we're going to a monthly model where it's kind of like a subscription. So, is my business set up to be able to handle that? So those are the type of things that you'll be able to work with the Vandas team to kind of work through and figure out what makes sense. What gaps do we have right now that possibly we need filled? What are our options in terms of filling those gaps? And also, is there a way for us to consolidate some of our hardware? Things along those lines. Then, of course, once you make those decisions on the business side of it, then it's starting to plan out, okay, what would this look like if we make this move? Are there applications that we know can move pretty seamlessly? Are there others that we may have to adapt the application a little bit to make sure that it fits our needs? And so that's where proof of concept comes in. And this is a key part of this. Assessing the environment is the number one thing. And then second would be, let's do a proof of concept. Maybe it's a small scale rollout of a couple applications, and let's see how this is going to work. Let's give our users access to it and see how they're going to be able to, to work. Is it going to affect their production? If it is, how is that in a good way or a bad way? Or make sure we understand just everything that we're in for. And then, of course, once you start that migration, as I said, it's not a matter of being all in. Maybe it's a situation where you move one workload at a time, or maybe it's a couple things that you move over, or maybe it's let's move a specific database or a legacy application or a file share, something along those lines. Let's make those moves, and then we can figure out a phased approach if we want, and kind of come up with a schedule for when we're going to make this move. Azure is going to give you those capabilities. The fact of the matter is, when we move towards Azure, you see the list here in terms of, and this is a relatively recent report from earlier this year, about what are people worried about and what are you worried about? I'm sure you're looking at this list and realizing there's a few things on here that you're having issues with, or that you're have anxiety about in terms of making this shift. You can see that that lack of resources and lack of expertise is pretty high, pretty high on the list. And honestly, in terms of the people that I talk to, this is probably the number one, just because they're worried that the manpower they have might not be able to, isn't ready to make this shift, isn't ready to, their team is not necessarily trained enough. Maybe it's, yes, they may be working on it, but it's going to take a little bit of time to get your team up to speed on the engineering side of things and the technology side of things, making sure that they're there. That's where, depending on a partner, can help you. I mean, there's resources that are available to you to help with not only the migration process itself, but also the planning. And then once you're in Azure, what's that look like? What is, who's managing it? Who's monitoring it? Is your team capable of doing that? If they are, great. If they're not, there's options for you to have, somebody come in, somebody like Vandus to come in and say, hey, here's what we see from our other partners. Here's what we can offer you. Let's do some managed services with you. Let's, try to, help you make this transition as smooth as possible. And then once you're in Azure, let's make sure that this continues to run. And as new technology and new services become available, let's make sure that you're exposed to those, make sure that you have access to those resources, and can continue to take advantage of everything that the cloud provides you. When we talk about those steps before, where I talked, being able to assess an existing environment, let's look at our existing environment, and see, what does it look like? Do we know where, what applications depend on other applications? What databases are running on the back end? How are users accessing different things? Do we have old resources that currently, we may have them allocated in the network, but is there a way maybe to consolidate some things, or maybe there's a way to scale? Maybe we've got a server that's just oversized right now on-prem. When we move it over to Azure, again, we're going to pay for exactly what we use, so we might as well get that right size so we can take advantage of some of the tools. And you can see listed there that Microsoft has multiple tools that are available to help you do that, whether it be just scanning your network and giving you a map of exactly where everything sits, where all the data connections are, et cetera. Let's see how that looks. And then, of course, are we ready to make that move? Let's make sure that our applications, our databases, et cetera, are ready to make that shift. And then once we do decide we want to make this, and we have workloads we want to move up to Azure, well, what is available to me to actually help make that move? Is there a possibility of doing this in a seamless fashion with almost little to no downtime for my users? Do I have, maybe I have a situation where I'm going to move workloads over the course of the weekend when workers aren't going to be affected. That's fine, but you got to make sure that you're planning all of that ahead of time. And again, this is something where you may not have the expertise, but there's options for you to be able to go through and get the answers that you need. And then, of course, this is the key thing, that once you make the move, how are you going to make sure that you stay on top of that? As I said earlier, when you talk about buying hardware, you buy hardware and you're planning to have it for 5 years. So a lot of cases, your on-prem hardware, you're not paying attention to it the way that you necessarily should. You're not looking at it and realizing that you might have over-allocated resources. You might have workloads that are over capacity or under capacity necessarily. So you need to make sure that you're watching that. When we talk about moving over into the cloud, it opens up new options for us, and there's some new services that we can take advantage of that'll watch things on our behalf. In a lot of cases for free. If you're talking about on-prem environments, yeah, there's management and monitoring tools that are out there, and you can continue to use those, of course. But let's expand what we're doing. Let's open up new options and new possibilities for ourselves. And again, that's where there are tools built into Azure that will be able to handle that. And as I just mentioned it before about third parties, that you might be using third-party tools right now, but Azure is not just Microsoft services. You got to remember that Azure is designed as a full ecosystem. So a lot of the software that you're using right now, the applications that you're using, even some of the hardware appliances that you're using right now, can all be integrated into Azure. So maybe it's a situation where maybe you're using Cisco or F5, or again, I'm just going to go through security vendors. As for your gateways or your routers or things along those lines, a lot of those vendors, and actually most vendors at this point, are starting to have virtual versions of their hardware appliances. So the hardware that you have running on-prem right now, you can continue to use that vendor, but now use it in Azure. They've got resources where they have virtual machines that already has the gateway appliance installed on it. So it's literally just click a button, it spins it up and provisions it in Azure. I can manage it, I can monitor it, I can maintain it the same way that I do on-prem, but now, again, I can do it in in the cloud environment. And this comes into play a lot with that hybrid model where, again, I might have stuff that's in Azure and I might have stuff that's on-prem. Having one central vendor or central software that I'm familiar with, that my engineers are familiar with, that I can continue to utilize. I'm not giving up any of the technology that I've been using for years. I can just now extend that up into Azure. So you probably spent, if you've got engineers on staff that are certified in certain vendors and certain technologies, there's no reason to give up that technology. There's no reason to necessarily shift completely away from it. Now I can just extend what I'm doing and move it up into Azure and take advantage of that. Again, there's a list of tools that are on the screen here that are designed around these three: assess, migrate, and optimize. But there's, this is just a small selection of what's available to you. So again, if you're using any sort of a third-party vendor right now for security, for monitoring, for even your databases, and even some of your storage appliances. You might have dedicated storage appliances on-prem. There's a lot of these vendors now have tools and resources and appliances that will allow you to extend the on-prem environment right up into Azure and be able to take advantage of that. So again, keep that in mind as we're going through, so that you can, again, not have to give up what you're doing. Now it's just a matter of, hey, what else can I do? I don't have to give stuff up. I can now just extend my current environment and be able to take advantage of what Azure can offer. So as I mentioned before, we're talking about, you may not have the technology or the expertise in the technology. You may not have the manpower, or maybe just your staff is already booked up. And so you can take advantage of a partner to help you through this process. So that's one of the things with, when we talk about reaching out, and I'll give the contact info in just a minute, but reach out to the team at Vandas. Make sure that they understand your business. Make sure that they understand what you're looking to do. What does your roadmap look like? Every customer, and this is funny because I talk to a lot of customers, they're like, well, what is everyone doing? And the answer is, everyone's doing something different, because that's the joy and the benefit of going in this direction, moving towards infrastructure as a service, is you don't have to be in that cookie cutter anymore. You don't have to be boxed in by the hardware that you purchased. Now it's really about, let's take a look, let's sit down and go through and figure out, how is this, what does my business look like today? What do I want it to look like in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years? Are we making the moves? Is there anything on the technology front that's possibly holding us back, that we, because of cost constraints, manpower constraints, et cetera, are there things that we, don't do that we might like to do if we could? And if we want to make those moves, do we know what we're doing? Do we have the ability to make that transition? Do we have the ability to move in that direction? If you don't, that's where you can rely on a partner to have have them help you, somebody with expertise in this world, and whether it be the technology itself, just answering questions about what the technology can do, but also being able to position, what is this? What's the project? What's the scope? What does this look like? If I've seen other customers have gone through similar journeys, what did they run across? What are the things we need to worry about, et cetera? So that's one of the things, again, keep this in mind, that you're not in this alone. And so you see the list here in terms of what does this process look like when we talk about this journey? What would it look like if we want to migrate from some workloads up to Azure from an on-prem environment? And as you can see, generally it falls into kind of a progression of 4 categories. First is, let's talk about the business. That earlier visual display that you saw that had kind of the arrow going through and kind of what the path looked like. That the business aspect of this is the most important thing, because if you just take your existing workloads, take your existing technology, and just shift it all into Azure without actually planning and really taking advantage of what IaaS can offer you, when we talk about infrastructure as a service, then it's pointless. I mean, you're going to end up spending a lot more money. In a lot of cases, it's probably going to be more expensive than running it on premises. So what we need to do is, let's take a look at the business, find out what your needs are, and then figure out what the best path is going to be. So that way, when we make this shift up into Azure, into infrastructure as a service, how are we going to make sure we take advantage of that from a cost perspective? Is there ways we can save money. And I'll tell you straight up, there's, depending on what's going on, depending on your situation and your technology and how your business is running, you can see some very, very significant savings. I mean, we're talking about 60, 70% in a lot of cases over the cost of hardware. So, that kind of savings can open up a lot of new possibilities for those projects that maybe you'd like to do, but you can't do now. So again, the business aspect is going to be the key part of this, to figure out where do you want to go. Then after that, let's figure out what that migration looks like. What would this process look like if we want to do this? Do we have a timetable? Do we want to do this over 3 months? Do we want to do it over 1 month? Do we want to do it over a year? Again, let's take a look and see what's going on with that migration. And then, of course, if you need to test things out, if you need to have, if there's new applications that you want to try, or maybe it's just, let's see how the existing applications we have are going to run for us, we can do proof of concepts, and that's something that Vandus is very familiar with and can assist with, to be able to, let your users kick the tires, let them see what it's really going to be like for them, and then once you clear that hurdle, once you know that this is going to work for you, let's make the migration. Let's make this happen and see how this is going to, what the process is going to look like. And then, of course, once it is migrated, how are we going to make sure that we stay on top of this and manage it and maintain it in the best possible way, to the benefit of the users and or your customers, and also to the benefit of your IT staff. Are they going to be able to take advantage of some of these new technologies, these new services as new things become available? So again, we've kind of gone through a relatively high level what this looks like, what this journey looks like. Obviously, there's a lot of technology behind the scenes that if you are going to be shifting your workloads, that's a second conversation that you can look into and that we can help you with. But keep in mind that this is not a couple things I want. First off, you're not alone in where you are right now in terms of understanding how, or not understanding how Azure can possibly work for you. I mean, this is new technology for the most part. Yes, it's been around for a few years at this point, and in a lot of, it's the same basic concepts. It's compute, it's storage, it's networking. I mean, those underlying concepts are the same, whether you're on-prem, whether you're in Azure, whether you're in a hosted location, whatever the case may be. It's just a matter of the mindset around it and the delivery method, and that's really what it comes down to. Understanding that Azure is going to open up new possibilities for you in terms of being able to take what you're doing and do it in a more efficient manner. So again, let's sit down, let's talk about what's available to you, and how this is going to affect your business. If you want to, even right after this webinar, if you wanted to start taking a look at what Azure has to offer, you'll see 3 links that are listed here. First is Azure actually offers a total cost of ownership, or TCO calculator. So you can actually plug in your existing hardware, and it will give you a very rough estimate of what it would look like if you transition that or just shifted it as is, apples to apples, shifted into Azure. What would that look like? Then, of course, it's when we're talking about making that shift up to Azure, honestly, doing a full lift and shift and doing an apples-to-apples comparison is not really going to give you the best view. It's not going to give you the big picture view of everything that's going on. And so they have that, the Azure Migrate that I mentioned earlier, as well as other tools that'll kind of give you an idea of what that journey is going to look like, and also give you guidance and the ability to understand it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. So if we go, we start with point A and we want to go to point B, what is that transition going to look like? What are the changes that we have to make? Again, there's tools that are available. So if you go, again, you can see azure.com/migration, you'll have access to a lot of the tools and the information that'll help you start thinking, in the right mindset to make this type of a shift. And then, of course, if you're on the technical side, or actually on the sales side too, just so you kind of understand what's going on with the technology, why Azure, why shifting over to an infrastructure as a service model, to that utility style billing model, to that service style model, what is that going to look like, and how do we start getting our team trained and help them understand? There's resources for that as well. So everyone's going to get a copy of this presentation afterwards, so you'll have these links, but feel free to jot these down and take a look. I'd recommend you take a look even today, just so you understand that there are tools that are out there. So while a move like this possibly could seem overwhelming, just understand that there's things that'll make this a lot less complex. It'll simplify things and help you understand what this journey is going to look like. So, how do I make this move? How do I start? It's pretty simple. You can contact Vandus. You can see there, the contact info here that's listed, whether email, phone, or their website. But the number one thing that I'll recommend to you is just contact your sales rep. I mean, they're ready to go in terms of being able to take you on this journey. They've got the resources and take you, along the path that you need. As I said, not every company and not every business is going to follow the same path. It's about customizing, and that's the joy of moving in this direction. Is you can customize. It's not a matter of just buying a big storage array and some big servers and being done. Now it's about, let's take a look at the business and find out what's really going to fit. So that's one of the things that I highly recommend. You can do this alone if you'd like. And I've got customers that do that because they're taking the time and putting in, maybe they're pulling some engineers out of the field or dedicating them to specific, to get up to speed on this. That's great if you've got that time and you've got that availability. I'll tell you that most of the people that I talk to don't have that kind of time to just kind of make this shift. So what they can do and what they do is actually benefit by talking to a partner, working with Vandus, working with them to help understand what this is going to look like. So again, that's main call to action. Just contact your sales rep and find out, what are your options? What are you doing from a business perspective now? Let's sit down. As I mentioned before, you saw earlier about a business planning session. Just schedule that so you can help, it'll help you understand your business at a deeper level and understand what the options are, what the possibilities are, to take advantage of where the industry is going, where things are shifting to in terms of infrastructure as a service, and why Azure may be a great fit for either some or possibly even all of your workloads to be able to really take your business to the next level. So I'm going to wrap up there. I'll leave it open for Q&A. If anybody has any questions or wants me to go over anything in a little bit deeper level, I'll leave that. I'm here to be able to answer those questions, or feel free to type them into the chat window if you prefer. But for those of you who don't have any questions and are going to be logging off, I just want to say thanks. I really appreciate your time this morning, and I look forward to working with all of you. And again, please contact us. Let the Vandus team help you as you're making this transition. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Phil. We appreciate you being here today. Again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to unmute your mic now or post them in the chat below. I just asked that if you call in via phone, if possible, if you could just type out your name in the chat window, just so we know who attended. This way we can make sure you get all the proper materials that we send out after the webinar. So with that, I'll give a moment for anyone if anyone has any questions. All right, I think we are good then. Phil, thank you very much again. And
actually,
oh yeah, go ahead.
Hi, this is Hanok from Nyack College. Thanks for your presentation. We have started using Azure and will do so. But one of the things that we've sort of been interested in looking at is there's certain workload that let's just say is it may be too from a price perspective. It's not a workload that we use that often. It's just once in a while, and we keep those shut down. Mm-hmm. But they still take up. They still pay for the storage.
Yes.
Aspect of things. So, and that adds up after some time. So, we're even thinking certain of those workloads, not necessarily to move them back, right? But let's see that workload. I'm not going to boot it up for like another 6 months, right? Mm-hmm. So all it's going to do for the next 6 months is literally just take storage cost. So it would be nice if I could bring that VM on-prem or somehow in a cheaper, situation, and then let's say 6 months later, bring it back up and have it turned on for, let's say, another month. And
Sure.
so just trying to figure out how we do. Obviously, we're already doing reserved instances. We're doing all those type of things, but there's still that cost that we're trying to recoup somehow.
Yeah, there is, and that's that. If you are, again, you're paying everything in Azure for the most part is a la carte. So you understand if you're using storage, you're going to pay for storage. So in something like that, a lot of times I'll see my customers. What we'll recommend is they'll say maybe we'll do a snapshot of that particular workload. Instead of storing it, just having the hard drive, the actual backend storage running at all times, maybe we'll do a snapshot of that storage and then put that into, again, you're only using it every 6 months, maybe we'll shift that into a lower tier storage, whether it be, again, this is getting, for those of you who are not technical in Azure, you'll learn this, but block blob storage, where instead of running it, maybe I can do a snapshot of that and then move that into archive level block blob storage, where I'm just holding it, and in that case, archive storage is literally fractions of a penny per gig. So that may be a situation where if you don't need access to that at all during this short period of time, just take the entire storage. Again, take a snapshot of it and move it over to a lower tier storage, to a lower cost storage, to be able to take advantage of what it can offer. I'm not saying that it's what you're doing right now in terms of shifting it back to on-prem during that period of time. It's about looking at the dollars and cents of it. Does that make sense? Do you have an existing on-prem environment? So if you do, that it's fine. If you've got the space and you want to be able to do that, you're more than welcome to do that. But it may be a situation where you could possibly just leave it in Azure and just, again, do a snapshot or an image and then save that in lower cost storage to be able to take advantage of the cost benefits.
So just a follow up then, let's say we did do that. Obviously, the downside of that is the amount of time that it would take to turn it on.
Correct.
Maybe, not only time, we're not really worried about the time, but the effort as well,
Yes.
Building the VM and all that. So do you guys have a methodology, from a consulting perspective where we could essentially scripted, right, go from something that's sort of in frozen mode, I'll call it, the way you just described, to back to a booted VM, all with one touch?
Yes. So the thing you need to remember is that everything in Azure is driven by scripting and by APIs on the back end. I mean, yes, there's a graphic interface for you to access Azure, but technically you don't even need to use that. You can do everything completely through command line, through scripting, through PowerShell. So if we can work with you to put together an actual script, both that will shut it down and save it and shift it over to that low-cost storage, and then also a script that'll say, I want you to, I click this button, it runs the script, it spins up the VM, it rehydrates my data, and then attaches that storage to that VM. So all of that can be scripted, definitely. And then honestly, that's kind of where, that automation is where taking things to that next level, that phase 2 that I talked about in terms of taking advantage of the resources that are available. Again, you can create scripts, or you can also, there's even pre-built scripts depending on the workload that you want to spin up. That will do that, and then you can modify those scripts and say, hey, I want you to spin up this server, and then I want you to attach this storage volume or these 5 storage volumes or whatever the case may be. So that can definitely be scripted, and that's definitely something we can work with you on.
My last follow-up is, let's say we chose the route of bringing that VM on-prem temporarily and then put it back on Azure 6 months later. Is there a way to take the VM that you guys have sort of as is? Also, can you script bringing it on-prem and script bringing it off-prem as easily as well?
Yes, as long as you have, because the thing is that there is an export option, and any Azure VM that you have running it's a VHD file. It's a VHD format. So you could potentially, again, script it to export that VHD and then send it down. If you've got a VPN connection or a dedicated connection between yourself and Azure, I mean, it's acting like one network. So again, you can script that to be able to send it where you want it to go. That script is going to run in that hybrid environment where you've got those two networks are acting as one, they're working together. So yes, you could very easily do that.
Okay. Thank you so much for your answers. May I ask who is the person that answered the questions? Your name, your full name? I didn't get it.
Sure.
I joined a little bit later.
Yep, my name is Phil Brocky. I'm a technical consultant for infrastructure as a service.
Phil Brock. Okay. Well, I'll keep in touch through Anna, which is a sales rep. Thank you so much for your answers.
All right. Thank you very much, Phil, for answering that question. Do we have any other questions before we conclude today? Okay. Wonderful. Again, thank you everyone for attending today. Thank you, Phil, very much for being here today with us. You'll all receive a follow-up via email with information on the webinar. Again, thank you for attending. Check out vandus.com/events for upcoming webinars, as well as our social channels on Twitter, Vandus Inc. Thank you very much, guys.